I feel very confident that the advice that we're giving is right.
That kind of does send the message of it's okay to struggle with things. That is human and normal.
There's like a lot of anxiety parents have with like, well, I don't want them to be mad at me.
Yeah.
What's up, guys? John here with Blueprint Mental Health, welcoming you to the 6th episode of the Blueprint Podcast. Today, I have Sam and Carly back with me, our regulars here, and want to welcome you to what we're calling the Back to School Special, right? We're going to talk about all things related to going back to school. It is the beginning of September. Fall is in the air, and with that definitely comes some new mental health concerns for sure. Just a little bit of background, usually as a practice that works a lot with children, teens, young adults, and also adults, but with those younger folks, summertime usually slows down, right? Folks are on vacation, there aren't many stressors there, and then what happens is usually September is pretty cool, but by the end of September, by definitely mid-October, the phone starts to ring off the hook. And the reason for that is, the beginning of the school year, it's stressful going back, but, it hasn't fully become real yet. But usually come October, definitely by November, assignments are coming due, social drama is happening, exams are happening, and that's when the phone usually starts to ring. So we want to talk about everything that we see with our current clients, what goes on for them with going back to school, talk about the younger kids, the middle school kids, the high school kids, and also we want to touch on a little bit of like college kids heading out to college for the first time. So Sam, Carly, whoever wants to go first, what are we seeing? Like what's the normal kind of like back to school stuff that we see as a mental health practice?
I feel like I see two different presentations of like kids and teens that come in, especially like end of August, first week of September, like what ends up coming through in their thoughts when they're in session with me. It's either on one hand, they're extremely excited to go back to school because they're going to see their friends and they're going to be getting the structure that they like from school. Then there's the other ones that are like absolutely dreading it, full of anxiety, can't sleep at night, like leading up to the week before school starts. So it's like you get the two polar opposites. And usually both of them, once they're like getting into the groove of school, will both present with potentially like ADHD or anxiety, but it really depends on the kid and what's going on with their schooling. If they're in the middle of being at the same school or if they're starting high school or college for the first time, it depends. That's what I usually say or what I've been noticing.
Yeah, I know I see clients a little bit older than you, like my range is more like 10 and up, and I see a lot of similar things, like a lot of dread going back to school, at the same time knowing like usually by the end of August they get bored, and they're like, I just need some structure in my life, like I don't want to go back to school, but I am excited to have like a routine. That's a comment that I hear a lot. But yeah, same thing, the issues that usually present are difficulty focusing, drama with friends, anxiety around school. Sometimes you have the kids who are really perfectionistic and care a lot about their grades, and that's causing a lot of anxiety and stress. Or you have kids that grades aren't really their most important thing, but it's causing family conflict. Maybe their goals for school don't align with their parents' goals for school, and that causes stress and, relational issues with family. So it's, you think about a kid in school, that's what, 75% of their life, like at the time. And
It's their full-time job.
It's their full-time job, so they're surrounded by all the challenges that school brings up. So that's usually a common, topic of conversation in the fall for sure.
Yeah, it's how I know I'm getting old.
Yeah.
Because like the fall comes and I find myself like thinking about, like, they're all talking about going back to school, and I'm like, oh, that sounds so awesome.
Yeah.
Like how cool
Yeah, we
is
forget.
it to like go back and like be around all these people your own age, and you see your friends, or there's like some pretty girls that you want to see, or some boys that you're into, and then like you go hang out with your friends at lunch and like maybe learn some cool shit. Like
Yeah.
to me, it's like I'm like, wow, I'd love to go back to high school.
Yeah,
Like
some kids,
knowing
that's
what I
their
know
worst
now,
nightmare. Yeah.
you know. I think about going back to school, I get excited. You know, like I think that it brings back a lot of nostalgia for me. And as I was saying, my clients definitely don't see it the same way that I do. And I mean, we're going to talk about a lot of stuff, but one thing that just kind of like rang a bell for me that I hear a lot is about like sleep schedules.
Oh, yeah.
Like this week, I've heard a lot of like, oh man, my sleep schedule's the worst. I got to get back on a sleep schedule. Like, and it's something I never really thought about, I think, when I was younger, you know, but yeah, a lot of these kids were like, staying up all night. They were able to sleep in the next day. They didn't have much in the way of responsibility. And they have these plans, right, to get back on a sleep schedule. Like, oh, I'll start like 2 weeks out before the start of school. And then it's like 1 week and 6 days and 1 week and 5 days. And it keeps getting closer and closer. And now it's like the day before they're going to school and they're like trying to get back on this sleep schedule, you know. But, you know, like, I think that's just part of being a teenager, you know. Like, I remember getting up for school and like being miserable and like having to go take a shower, and it was so cold and it's still dark out, and like not wanting to go to school. I only slept like 4 or 5 hours, you know. But yeah, I hear a lot about the sleep schedule for sure.
Yeah, that's a big one. Did you ever have to like run to the bus stop or anything? Like that was always me. I was always waking up late. I mean, I'm still like that, I guess.
As the person who got here like 5 minutes
ago.
after 10 today. Yeah.
It's still kind of my thing. But yeah, that's like the hardest thing is waking up for school. Yeah.
No.
For a lot of kids.
I was definitely like not the kid that ran to the bus last minute. In elementary school, I was a walker because I lived close. So like I was the kid that you'd walk to school, you know, and then by like middle school and high school, I would take the bus. But like the difference though, like our bus stop had like 20 people.
Oh my God.
Right? It was like everyone would walk from all different parts of the neighborhood and land in this one spot. And you had the same kids at your bus stop. Fast forward to today. Have you been stuck behind a school bus anywhere lately?
Oh, yeah, they stop at every single house.
It's like every other house. They're stopping. The kids are getting picked up at their door. And there's like all these rules that if there's no sidewalk, then you have to pick them up and whatnot. If you get stuck behind one of those buses now, like...
You're screwed.
You're screwed.
Yeah.
That's just going to be what it is. And I would say, you're talking about like going to school, the bus was brutal when I was in school. Like that's when like some stuff went down, man. And I was definitely a back of the bus kid for sure. You know, like you wanted to sit in the last possible seat. You know, that's where all
that's
the
a
cool
great
kids
icebreaker question. Like, where did you sit on the bus in school? Like, it tells a lot, right?
I think it depended on your age usually, right?
True.
Like if you were like a 6th grader and they like started the middle school at 6th grade, you were in the front of the bus.
Oh yeah.
But in 7th grade in the middle, 8th grader in the back.
Yeah, usually. And like, I mean, we used to do crazy stuff on that bus, man. Like I remember a kid bringing a slingshot onto the bus and then our bus driver letting him off at different stops to collect more rocks and then getting back on the bus as he's shooting things from the bus window.
Oh, good.
I remember like the Napoleon Dynamite move of like tying like a figure to like a thing of like string and like dragging it behind the bus and like... Yeah, so I don't know if it's like that now.
I don't know.
I feel like it's much tamer on the bus. Like
there's like some energy about the bus. Yeah, more cameras.
They have their phones.
Their phones.
Yeah, they're all on their phones. This is what they're all doing on the bus.
A lot of this was me too. A lot of my clients say they'll just keep sleeping on the bus if they have to get up so early for school. They're like, I'm gonna get 20 more minutes of sleep on the bus. That was definitely me.
I find a lot more parents that are driving their kids to school.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's because there's like, ever since COVID, there's been more parents that work virtually or like have a little bit more ability for their work to accommodate their schedules so they can bring their kids to school. But like, I've noticed there's less kids that go on the bus. Yeah. I don't know why.
Anyway, I guess getting back to what we were talking about. Yeah, man. I mean, I think that school is always been in mental health like a major stressor. You know, over the years of doing this, definitely have had a lot of kids struggle with, I guess, what it could be called like school avoidance. You know, and that becomes kind of an issue where I think what I see happening there is whatever's going on at school. It could be their academics that they're really overwhelmed by, or the social piece of having some drama and not feeling like they're fitting in. And so the idea of going to school triggers this feeling of anxiety. And, we talked about this in the past. I know, Carly, you talk about this a lot. The easiest way to quell that anxiety is to avoid the thing that is driving that anxiety. And so what I see happen then is, okay, thinking about going to school, I think about all the drama that's happening there and not fitting in. The feeling of anxiety comes up, and then maybe starts with, Mom, I don't feel well. I have a stomach ache or whatever, or a headache. And then they don't go to school. And then they don't feel as anxious because they're not going to school. The next day it happens again. And the day after that it happens again. And what happens now is the brain starts to associate this behavior of avoiding with a feeling of relief or reward, right?
Yep.
And so it almost becomes now this pattern where as soon as the feeling of anxiety comes up, before that person has an opportunity to make the decision on their own, their brain is like, I know what to do.
Automatically.
This is what I did the last 50 times and it worked.
Right.
Right.
I definitely view that as a cycle, that feeds itself. Every time you go through that cycle, it makes it stronger and harder to break. And I think parents are struggling to break that cycle for their kids because the kids kind of have to do it themselves, but they don't want to, or it's just not comfortable. And
I think a lot of parents are also on this island of not knowing what to do, because when their kid, maybe before never presented with any mental health issues, all of a sudden now is waking up every morning and having a stomach ache. And so then they're taking them to a GI doctor and their pediatrician and going all over the place trying to figure out what's going on with them. And it's well, they're telling me they have this stomach ache. How are all of these tests coming out as nothing? Which is usually when the doctors end up saying, well, maybe you should see a therapist. But usually that's the first time parents realize, oh crap, my kid's struggling. And usually I notice with my younger kids specifically, they're not able to communicate exactly why they're having that anxiety. So their parents may sit them down and be like, well, what's going on at school? And they can't communicate that. I've had a handful that have had some different learning disabilities that the parents and the teachers didn't necessarily know about yet. So dyslexia or dysgraphia, that the reason they were having anxiety was because they were being put in a situation every day at school where they literally couldn't read or couldn't understand what they were reading or couldn't write. And it was kind of being lost in the moment. So I guess in a way, our bodies kind of telling us that, especially for younger kids, is important. And I teach them a lot about the psychosomatic parts of anxiety. I know our therapist Taylor has this creepy looking body thing where there's different organs in it. Oh, it's a new toy that she has.
Sounds
where she'll
fun.
have the kids pull out the stomach and be like, this is where your stomach is and this is where you're feeling this pain and this is why. You can also take the brain out too. I don't know.
cool.
Yeah, it's her new thing.
Okay. I mean, when you were talking, it made me kind of realize or just think about the idea that I feel it usually is something school related that eventually drives parents to reach out for therapy for their kid, right? I've had plenty of times where their child is asking to see a therapist and the parents are like, oh no, this is normal teenage stuff. You'll be okay. And it's all good, and that continues on until all of a sudden the grades start to drop. Right. And the grades starting to drop is usually the alarm bell that goes off for a parent to be like, oh, wait a second, maybe we do need to bring them to see a therapist, and because like you said, school is the vast majority of your life when you're a younger person like that. You said that's your full-time job. So if something's going to be impacted by having struggles with your mental health, it's going to show up usually at school.
Yeah. Yeah. I think too, kids kind of notice that as well. Maybe not as obviously all the time, but I think kids kind of notice okay, no one's really noticing this. No one's really hearing me. I've had clients even kind of be accused by their parents of failing a test on purpose, right? Because they're it's a cry for help kind of thing. And maybe it is, right? And, but I think it's important to get curious about that instead of punishing. Obviously there's consequences for bad grades and things like that, but yeah, the curiosity around why that shift is happening, why these behaviors or bad grades are happening. I always tell parents like meet that with curiosity instead of like punishment or consequences like right away. Obviously, it's okay to set consequences with that, but yeah, that is a big thing that gets people in the door for treatment for sure.
Yeah, and I was just thinking like I was thinking about this the other day actually that it's not abnormal to have parents get mad at their kids for their grades,
Yeah.
right? And I was thinking about that and I'm like, well, why mad though? Why angry? Like if you
Yeah.
look at like, anger as a warning sign, it's like that someone's wronging me,
Yeah.
right? So like, and I can understand like, okay, like if they try hard and they don't do well, and they get mad at them for that, that's one thing. But then let's say the parent thinks that, you know what, they're not trying hard, they're not giving 100%, right? And then they get angry at their kids for their grades, but why is it anger,
Yeah.
right? Because if you really think about that, you would think that that emotion was really like disappointment, right? I'm disappointed that they're not giving 100%. I'm disappointed. But a lot of parents do tend to turn to anger when they get upset with their kids about grades. I don't know. Do you notice that too? Like, is
For
it,
sure.
like, but I never really thought about it on that level before of like, why is it actually anger? Where's that coming from actually?
I oftentimes will teach clients and parents too that anger is an iceberg. So anger is what is shown on top, and then underneath there's a bunch of other feelings that is driving the anger. I think you hit the nail on the head, like disappointment. I had a parent yesterday that was saying that she was getting angry at her daughter because she didn't want to participate in an after-school activity and didn't get curious. And then her daughter shut down, and I met with her the day after, and she was more than willing to open up about why. And I helped like facilitate the two of them talking about it. And I think that usually though, you're right. It's like, oh, well, the parent's own anxiety gets in the way. And a lot of times it might be disappointment. It might be parental anxiety that leads to this anger. It's easier to express anger in the moment than it is to really like be in touch with your own emotions, to be able to be like, wait a second, I'm anxious because now my kid is not doing what I expected them to do. They're not getting the A or getting into the honors class that I wanted them to do, that I knew they would be capable of.
Yeah. I have a lot of clients who struggle with ADHD. So I always joke with my ADHD clients, like a classic line that you'll hear throughout your academic life is, if you're so smart, if you only just applied yourself, you would like be so good, right? You'd be so successful, right? And my clients will always laugh when I bring that up because they're like, oh my God, yes, like I hear that like all the time, like it's so annoying. So maybe that's also where some frustration from parents, is coming from. Like, I see this potential in my kid. I know that they're smart. I'm seeing proof of that in other areas of their life. But when it comes to actually putting in the work, it's not showing up. And like sometimes that's the frustration. It's like you're better than this. Like you can do this, and you're not applying yourself. And with ADHD specifically, I mean, this is a topic that comes up every year with school. A lot of ADHD behaviors present as laziness or not caring or defiance even sometimes, or sneakiness. I'm lying about getting my homework done. And that can cause a lot of issues. And I think a lot of times parents look at that as like a behavioral concern, which it is to an extent. But really half the time with these ADHD kids, it's like literally just a matter of my brain doesn't operate that way. Like that's not how I get motivated. That's not how I function. I need things that are different than what are going on, and it's really hardly ever an act of defiance, an act of laziness, an act of, any kind of like behavioral issue. Usually it's a symptom of what they're experiencing, and the clashing with, this is how our academic system works, or this is how homework works at home. It's so different from how my brain actually operates. Usually that's where those issues kind of come up. I don't know if you're probably seeing that too.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's important for parents and the kids to be able to understand like why like, why does my brain function like that when I have ADHD? So I often bring out this one graphic that shows an executive functioning wheel. So people with ADHD often struggle with executive functioning, which is where you'll see them having a hard time with organization. Like their room might look like a bomb went off in it, or they can't organize like their homework. So then they'll have like all these colored folders, or they might not be able to plan timing correctly, which is why Carly's always late. So different, that's like just a little bit of it. There's also like inflexibility with their thinking. So like that's where there might be black and white thinking of like, well, I'm not going to do my homework right now because the TV is on and I really want to go do this. And it's like, well, you can do that after, but the inflexibility of being able to shift what they expected versus like what needs to happen. So that's where I find like executive functioning education is really helpful. And I know a lot of schools are shifting their gears because of the large amount of ADHD kids in general to having teachers being certified executive functioning coaches. I haven't seen it in action yet, but that's what I've heard.
That'd be cool. Yeah.
No, because like you guys brought up so much different stuff for me. Like, cause I had this one client, athlete, senior in high school, and I was working with him every other week, and then his parents on the off weeks, right? Because there was some family dynamic stuff that was going on that we needed to definitely address. And I was meeting with his dad. His dad was a super cool guy. I really liked him. And his dad's like, John, you know, like I was asking him, you know, to like leave your uniform, your dirty uniform outside your door for me so I could wash it for you so you can have a clean uniform, right? And then to bring your plates down that are in your room. And like another day I ask him, he doesn't put it out there. And another day I ask him, and then finally John just lost my shit and I freaked out on him, and you know I'm not supposed to do that and everything. And I wait till he was done, and then I was like, okay, I'm like, what if that had nothing to do with you? Right? Yeah. Like, what if that has absolutely nothing to do with you, him not putting his stuff out there? And he paused for a second. He's like, oh, okay. Yeah, I think I get what you mean here. And, you know, he's coming from this place of feeling disrespected.
Yeah.
Right? That like, you don't respect me enough to follow my rules. I'm trying to do something positive for you, right? And you don't respect me enough. And now feeling disrespected is going to trigger a much different reaction and feeling than, okay, this dude's really struggling with some executive functioning skills here, you know? And I hear what you're saying about like schools now training teachers, because I've thought about it too, as like offering, maybe, is there an opportunity for us to offer some like executive functioning coaching for clients here, right? Not like a tutor in a way of like, for algebra or chemistry or something, but someone that could just sit down, not necessarily a clinician, but like a educator that could just each week sit down and help plan out that student's week, you know? So I think that the ADHD thing is prevalent now, right? But as I've said before, like I'm on the fence in that, okay, it doesn't matter. I'm not sure of like where that diagnosis comes from, but at the rate that everything moves in the world right now, right? Like, is this the brain just adapting to the speed that things change at now? Because like, even if you watch a TV show on like A&E or something like that, or anything, it's like, you know, or these guys here that are editing the videos, you see when they edit, it's like one angle, another angle, close, far, like every second, it's like a different change. Every time that happens and you're watching this thing, your brain is taking new information. And that's how the world is just working. So then you take that kid, you put him in front of a book and you're like, read this chapter. And they're like, yeah, sure. And then the brain is like, what's next? What's next?
Right.
What's next? So I think that some of it is just like more of a nurture versus nature kind of situation when it comes for some folks, you know? And at the same time, I'm also on the fence of like, okay, well, how much do we accommodate that though, right? Because like we've said plenty of times before, this might not be your fault, but it sure as hell is your problem to deal with. And if we just continue to accommodate for that person all the time, they never learn to kind of deal with those obstacles that they have. Like it might be more difficult for you to get organized or more difficult for you to be on time, but you can still be organized and still be on time. So like, I think there needs to be some kind of like balance there, middle path, gray area kind of place, you know, where we're not over accommodating, because I think that's where we tend to lead lean to a little bit when it comes to the schools these days, like almost over
Sometimes, yeah.
accommodation.
Yeah.
And the world just doesn't work that way.
Yeah. I think that's like a lot of parents' biggest fears about exploring an actual diagnosis. And I know we say all the time with a lot of different disorders, whether or not you get the diagnosis, we'll treat the symptoms. That's kind of how we run things here. But I think that's a really common fear for a lot of parents. If I explore this diagnosis and they get confirmed, to have ADHD, they're going to use it as an excuse for everything, right? And that's a valid fear because some kids probably would
will,
do that,
yeah.
right? They will. So something that like I try to really like drive home to my clients who like would meet criteria for that diagnosis is it's an explanation, not an excuse, right? Like just like you would think that way about anybody else in your life, right? Okay, you struggle with depression, you still have to take a shower, you struggle with anxiety, you still have to go to school, you struggle with ADHD, you still got to get that homework done, but having that validating explanation for why it's difficult takes a lot. It actually does help with avoidance in what I've seen because sometimes avoidance is coming from I'm sitting in front of this homework assignment. I can't do it. I'm internalizing that, right? I'm so stupid. I'm not good at this. I'm bad in some way. And that sometimes is the exact feeling that they're avoiding. So sometimes having the validating diagnosis or just that level of understanding from the people in your life is like, okay, I'm not stupid. I'm not lazy. I am capable. And that reduces the feeling that they're trying to avoid a little bit, right? Like,
With the kid I was talking about with the baseball jersey, right? The feedback I gave to dad was, and this is just in general how I usually approach parents, is like, because you'll get parents that either are on these two different extremes, right? Overly enabling and too warm and fuzzy, or helicopter and too kind of rigid, right? Or you'll have within the family one parent one way, the other parent the other way, right? And so what we talk about here all the time is like it's rarely either or, right? And then there's usually this gray area in the middle of how to approach things like this. So you can be validating, understanding, compassionate about the struggles that your child has, whether it be ADHD, depression, anxiety, autism, right? And at the same time have consistent limits and boundaries with them, right? So, my interaction with that dad was to advise him to do something along like this. Let's say the kid's name was Billy. Grabbing Billy when it's a good time, right? Like everyone's in a good space, right? Not like in the moment where you're heated. That's never the best time to have those conversations. And unfortunately, that's when they tend to kind of come up. But being able to grab Billy, maybe you guys just went and got some ice cream together and you're in the car, and then being able to be like, yo, Billy, let me talk to you about something, bro. Listen, I get that like it's hard for you to stay on task and to like remember everything that you need to remember, and I don't think that you're doing that on purpose to kind of spite me in any way. And at the same time, bud, that's your responsibility to bring those dishes down or to leave that jersey outside of your door. Like, we're not even asking to wash it yourself. We're asking you to put the jersey outside so we can wash it for you, right? At the end of the day, though, that is your responsibility, as difficult as those struggles are. I understand that. So here's the deal, dude. Moving forward, I'm going to ask you one time, right, to bring the dishes down by tomorrow. Make sure you put your jersey out there, right? And then, like, if you don't put the stuff out there or you don't bring the dishes down, there's gonna be some consequences to that, right? And figuring out what those consequences are going to be. And not coming from a place of anger, though, right? Not like, you did it again, what the fuck is, like,
yeah.
not that energy, but hey, bud, we talked about this. And I told you that if you don't bring your dishes down, that this is what's going to happen, right? Now, dishes in the room, food building up, maybe not wanting to let natural consequences play out, right? That we start
Yeah.
having ants and bugs and everything. But that jersey, dude, sure. Why don't you show up to your game with a dirty jersey? Like maybe that has to be the natural consequences that play out, right? And I think that parents very often are concerned or worried about allowing natural consequences to play out.
Yeah.
Listen, his uniform is dirty. He doesn't look good. Coach gets pissed at him, but it's not going to be the end of the world, but it might make him think twice about it the next time when you ask him, you know. So that's that middle ground of being validating, compassionate, loving, understanding, and having consistent limits and boundaries. And like, I don't know about you guys, but usually, dude, like, and I'm not to get too far off topic, but like a lot of parents bring their kids here to be like, oh my God, they're so messed up. Here, fix them. And the real cause of what's happening is more to do with the family dynamics that are going on at home, right? Where a lot of parents what'll happen is like they'll yell and they'll scream and they'll get angry and they'll get pissed off, but then they'll need no consequences actually put in place. It's just the yelling and the screaming. So now the kid's not learning anything, but the relationship is being impacted. And you start having these power struggles, you know, or they're just like, not doing any of that, not setting any limits and boundaries, not even addressing it. And like, you know, I don't know.
And sometimes it makes it worse, right? Because then the kid is like, I can't come to my parents with these difficulties because they're going to get mad, versus I need support and I can go to my parents about it, you know?
And getting mad at him isn't enough of a consequence. No. You know?
Yeah.
It's like procrastinating, right? Like the procrastination, the stress of procrastinating is not enough because the work gets done at the end of the day, you know? And the screaming's not enough from a parent because there's no actual consequence.
Right. And I think you're right about, you know, a common thing that parents kind of get confused by is like, okay, if I validate and show them this understanding, that's going to enable the problem. And it's quite the opposite. I mean, obviously it has to be done carefully, but it's quite the opposite, right? I think if you meet your child with that compassion, understanding, and also at the same time set the consequences and boundaries, that kind of does send the message of it's okay to struggle with things. That is human and normal, and I can rely on my family to help me through that. Maybe I don't always love the consequences, right? But like you said, usually the consequences that parents are putting into place are to help avoid worse and natural consequences. That's a huge thing that comes up with school, right? Yeah, I'm hard on you about your grades because I don't want you to fail and flunk out of school and be, you know, struggling in the future. And but especially with ADHD kids, but I think all of us, it's hard to have that foresight. Like our brains are wired to care about feeling good right now instead of I'll thank myself later for doing that. So it's just hard. It's hard for kids to like act on that now for something that'll help them later.
Yeah. I've gotten before, especially with like the validation piece from parents, like how can I validate them and like how hard it is for them to bring their dishes downstairs? That's ridiculous. And they like laugh at it. And I'm like, okay, well, hold on a second. Let's think about this. Because is what you're doing now working? Is yelling at your kid right now working?
Right.
Probably not.
Well,
they wouldn't be here.
Especially for parents who have like been through some shit. Like some of these parents have been through the generation that's like more corporal punishment, more like that's not how we dealt with it. Like I just listened to my parents. They yelled at me and I listened. So it is totally understandable how parents might have a hard time like with that, you know, because like you're right. It sounds ridiculous in the moment to be like, I understand it's hard to like bring the dish downstairs. That might just seem like really silly at first. Yeah.
I also think too, right? Like parents currently in this generation, their parents were yelling at them. So they're doing what inherently they were taught. And it's not working for this generation is pretty much what we're picking up. And that's where we're having to teach parents, and which is why we have parent coaching as something that we do, which is when we have parents come in and meet with a therapist to be able to discuss, okay, well, what parenting strategies are working for you, what's not, how can we give you some therapeutic-based feedback to be able to bring home with you. And I feel like that in particular is so helpful to this generation because it's like all of these kids are like on their iPads for hours at a time, and parents don't know how to be able to be sturdy parents and be able to recognize like, okay, I actually have to set that boundary. I have to actually follow through with that consequence. I also think there's like a lot of anxiety parents have with like, well, I don't want them to be mad at me. I'm going to take their iPad away and they're going to be mad at me and I don't want that. And so that's where oftentimes like parents being able to do that check-in of like, wait a second, before I snap at them, I have to think about, okay, what am I feeling? And I also need to evaluate what is their behavior telling me before I go in and I actually deal with whatever the situation is.
Right. Is what I'm going to do actually going to be effective and efficient
Yeah.
in what I'm trying to accomplish? Or am I doing exactly what I'm trying to get my kid not to do, which is just do what feels good for me in the moment? By yelling and screaming in that moment, I'm meeting a need for myself. I feel like I did something, like I got this off my chest. I feel better, but like you said, is it working? You know, the way you've been doing it for a really long time is yielding the same results. Maybe you have to look at it differently. And I want to be really clear to the people that are watching, like, and especially like we all have somewhat different kind of approaches as different clinicians here. And I'm definitely not like the super warm and fuzzy, like super coddling clinician at all, right? And that's not how I live my life. And at the same time, I'm saying that like both of those things can exist. Like you can be validating, you can try to put yourself, and like to actually really validate someone, like, and I think I've talked about this in a previous episode, like what it means is to like put yourself in their shoes and to acknowledge that how they're feeling actually makes sense. You don't have to agree or disagree with how that person's feeling. You know, like it's like that you understand that how they're feeling makes sense. And it's funny when you teach parents about validation, like it's kind of cute where like at first they try it and like they'll go home and they'll be like, oh, okay, what's my opportunity to validate? And they're like, I understand how you feel, right? But, you know, and then they throw like the boundary in there. And it's like, it's just acknowledging, like, you know, trying to put yourself in the shoes of what like a 16-year-old girl is experiencing in the year in 2024 to the best of your ability, right? But I think you're right in that, like, you know, those parents were raised much differently.
Yeah.
And it's hard to kind of undo that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I always tell parents to jump in the hole with their child.
Yeah, I like that.
You have to really recognize like how they're feeling, and like you can put their shoes on and walk in them a little bit, but like you really being able to like close your eyes and realize, okay, like how are they really feeling right now? Because clearly like them having a meltdown for hours at a time, what kid wants to have a meltdown for hours at a time? Or what kid wants to fail all of their classes? There's something there, and being able to really be able to sit with the emotion that your child might be feeling, I think better helps parents better help. It helps parents better parent.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think, you know, there's emotions, like you said, there's emotions that come up for parents, you know, in those moments. But same thing, I kind of try to tell parents to take a collaborative approach. So that way you're still setting the boundaries, but you're jumping in the hole with your kid, right? So it's like, okay, I'm not okay with the stuff that I'm seeing. You must be really struggling with that too. What does that feel like for you? What does it feel like to even talk about it? Are you like crawling out of your skin right now with me bringing this up? You know, making it as much of a collaboration as possible. Like, okay, I hear you. This is something that's really hard. We got to figure out a way to deal with it, right? Like, what are your ideas? So even like a really simple example, like cleaning your room, right? Hey, your room is a mess. Like, what does that feel like for you? Is this like stressing you out? Some kids would be like, no. You know, some kids would be like, yeah, but I can't deal with it. It's too overwhelming, right? So that's a great example of an opportunity for collaboration, right? Okay, we have to get this room clean. I'm gonna say, let's have it be done by Sunday night. You know, what do you think should be a consequence for if it's not done by Sunday night? Like, here are my ideas. What do you think? You know, kind of collaborating as much as you can. And some kids respond better to that than others, but you know, still able to set the boundaries, still able to set the consequences, but kind of giving a little bit of autonomy, right? How are you going to get this done by Sunday? Do you need help, or do you want to just kind of do your own thing? Do you need me to help you organize and plan how you're going to clean your room? Do you need me to buy you some trash bags, bring them upstairs, whatever, right? Like,
Right.
yeah. Or do you want to just kind of do this on your own? And if you can't do it on your own, then I'm going to step in, or then this is going to be the consequence. You know, there's usually a lot of room for some form of collaboration. So where you're kind of joining with the client and also setting with the kid. I mean,
There's a book called The Explosive Child, and the doctor that wrote the book speaks specifically about Plan B. So Plan A never really works because that's probably you yelling at your child.
Yeah.
And then Plan B is like, okay, we need to actually take a step back and collaborate with the kid. So exactly what you explained is that. I oftentimes recommend that book to parents because I think it really helps explain a little bit more of like validation and also explain that like your kid has a say in like what they do and like how to be able to fix that problem, because the reality is you always jumping in is not going to set your child up for long-term success.
Yeah.
And that's where you being sturdy and you setting consequences and you having boundaries, that's you helping your child understand like, oh, when I'm at work, if I don't feel like doing this like whatever it is, assignment or task, you can't just not go to work. You'd
Right.
probably get fired.
Right.
So when your kid doesn't want to go in for a school presentation, like accommodating that probably won't help them in the future. And understanding too that like we get that you're a human before you're a parent, and if your kid is like now like saying their stomach hurts and you have to be at work in 30 minutes and you're getting angry because you're like, well, crap, now I'm gonna have to explain this to my boss, and being able again to check in with yourself in that moment of like, okay, I'm gonna be 30 minutes late to work, and like I need to help this kid or be a little bit more sturdier. This is the consequence that's gonna happen.
Yeah.
It's just something.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, because I'm thinking like, you know, now that I have a 4.5-month-old baby at home, this beautiful little nugget, I would put her picture up on the screen, but I don't want any creepers out there
Yeah, no.
downloading it. But sorry. I get all these like videos in my Instagram feed now that's all about like babies, right? Like my Instagram feed is like cool guy gun stuff, and then babies is basically what shows up in there. And then like
Cool guy baby
therapy stuff, and then like EMT stuff, but then babies, you know? And there's a lot about how like even at like 4.5 months, 6 months to up to a year, not stepping in to rescue that baby, right? To allow them to kind of struggle a little bit if they're like having a hard time sitting back up again, like let them struggle a little bit in order to like build their confidence, right? Because that's where confidence comes from. And if as a parent throughout that child's life into high school, even college, you're constantly stepping in to rescue, one, you're not allowing the child to face adversity, right? Which then teaches them how to deal with adversity when they are independent. Because if you think about it, we're born dependent on another human being to be alive, right? Then eventually our goal is to get to a place of independence that I can survive on my own, and then hopefully get to a place that down the road, you know, someone else could be dependent on us. So we become a parent, and then in circle of life, we wind up being dependent on people again at the end of our life, right? But if you're constantly stepping in and not allowing your child to face adversity, they're not learning to deal with it. They're not building confidence, you know? And I think that that's one of the main things I see showing up with the parents that I work with is like being overbearing. And so in regards to that, I think we could definitely talk about dealing with schoolwork and how parents manage their kids' schoolwork. Because I mean, it is back to school. This is a topic that comes up a lot. And in the year 2024, we have real-time grading, right? Like where, you know, when I was growing up, it was like one day a marking period that I had to stress out, right? Which was the day that the report cards came out. And this might be a little bit, did you guys have like regular report cards or did you have, okay. I wasn't sure. And then so report cards would come out. And I didn't even know what my grades were going to be, right? Like I would maybe go up to my teacher's desk and like there'd be all the handwritten grades there where I would look and be like, okay, it looks maybe it's a B, I might get an A minus. And then I'd be surprised when my grades came out. And that was the one day I had to show up. And like, remember kids would like hide their report card from their parents or like try to intercept the mail if it was being mailed home, if their grades weren't good and anything. But that was all that we had to worry about. Fast forward to today, and like we have real-time grading where you can check your grades at any time. And some schools are moving away from actually keeping that open during the school day because they realize it's an issue. But not just kids checking their grades all the time, the parents coming in and telling me they're checking 5 or 6 times a day, right? And then they're texting their kid at school about grades, you know, and it's become like this clusterfuck of an issue really when it comes, you know. So I have some thoughts on how, because then it also becomes like parents every day. The kid comes in the door. Oh, how'd you do on this assignment? What homework do you have? Like, and so what I see happening is the parents are constantly asking about schoolwork. That kid then starts to isolate and avoid that parent and hide in their room, because if I run into mom in the kitchen, she's going to ask me about some shit that I don't want to talk about, right? And then mom is left worrying, dad is left worrying, checking the grades, like constant arguments about schoolwork. What are your thoughts on that? I have an approach that I like to take, but I'll get there in a little bit.
I actually had a client that used to log into her mother's email and delete the emails from her teachers.
Smart.
So, and that was something where it's like, okay, well, like, obviously not a good thing that she's doing that. But at the same time, you also have to look at it and like, well, what's leading to the kid doing that? What's the reaction that the parent is giving to that child in that moment of like getting that email from whatever teacher and freaking out on them and like not being able to sit down and be like, okay, really what's going on? I'm curious like how you would approach that.
About reading, checking.
Like deleting emails from teachers.
Oh, dude. I honestly, my approach, like, there would be, well, there's a couple things, right? Because we gotta check, okay, why is the child doing that, right? What kind of reaction or response is mom and dad having to the grades, right? Is it that they're yelling and screaming and, there's crazy consequences, like you're grounded for the next month, and so now the kid's like, okay, I'll take my chances deleting the stuff rather than be honest, because if I'm honest, then I know what the consequences are going to be, right? So I would look first at like, how are mom and dad handling bad grades coming through, right? To first take a look at that. But if as the parents, if they're saying, you know what, dude, like, no, we're cool, and like we have some consequences in place, but like, no, like, we handle it and we work with her on how to, like, improve her grades and everything like that, and the kid is going in and deleting a parent's email like that, to me, you're dropping a heavy consequence for that one, man. That's like, now we're talking about trust, and like, but then it becomes like, okay, mom and dad, are you giving them a space to be able to trust? And like, how is that going? But I would say that comes with like a heavy consequence.
And also like following through with the consequences.
But yeah, and being consistent with it, because dude, that's the pattern, right? It's like the parents are yelling and screaming, but there aren't any consistent limits and boundaries and consequences in place, and then the parents are getting frustrated, which makes them scream more. And then it's like, I don't want to put consequences in place because I'm afraid of the reaction that my kid's going to have. And what you're now having is, instead of you conditioning your child, the child is conditioning you. So you're now in a place where, like, I'm avoiding putting a consequence in place because I'm afraid of what the consequence I'm going to have to face because of how my kid's going to react. Right? And now that child is starting to slide up above the parents in that hierarchy in the household, and that's not good for anybody at that point. The approach that I take, and I'm telling you, this has worked a million times over, right? When we have a situation where there's constant conflict in the house around work getting done, and then the kid is isolating, this is what we do. We collaborate on a plan. And we bring the kid in and we tell the kid that, listen, here's the deal. Understand that this is really annoying that mom and dad are constantly on top of you about your grades, right? So here's the deal. We got a new rule in the house, Billy. My client's always named Billy.
It's always Billy.
Always Billy, right? Because I don't have a client named Billy.
Yeah.
So it's like, here's your deal, Billy. Mom and dad are not allowed to ask you about school the entire week, nor can they check your grades. How's that sound, Billy?
Sweet.
Billy's like, heck yes, sign me up for that shit, right? But here's the deal, though, because that meets your need, right? And there's multiple people in this family that have different needs. Your need is to feel independent and to feel like you're handling this stuff on your own. So that meets your need that mom and dad all week long can't ask about school. Mom and dad have needs, though, too. And their needs are, as your parents, they need to know that you're doing okay. It's their job to kind of prepare you for the world and to make sure that you're successful. So not knowing how you're doing with your schoolwork is going to trigger some worry for them and whatnot. So we need to come up with something that's going to meet their needs as well. And here it is. They can't ask about school all week long. but you, Billy, agree that every Friday, pick whatever day you want, at 3 o'clock, pick whatever time you want. You agree to sit down with them for 20 minutes, half hour, review your work, review your grades, take a look at it, come up with a game plan for the next week, and then you go back into the next week and we start over again. What happens then, and now I'm pulling my client aside. I'm like, all right, bro, listen, I just went to bat for you, right? I got mom and dad off your back. Now you need to show up, right? That Friday comes around, your work needs to be done, because then if your work's done, they're going to look at this situation and say, oh, wait, when I give mom and dad room, or excuse me, when I give Billy room, he gets his work done, right? And vice versa, right? You need to also then, like, they need to reinforce you, right? And it goes the other way around. You wind up then reinforcing each other. Now, when that plan gets put into place, 9 times out of 10, Billy starts coming around more. He's now in the kitchen because there's more organic conversations happening. He's not worried about being asked about school. And at the same time, hopefully that work gets done. Now, if the work doesn't get done and Friday comes around and Billy's missing all these assignments, then it's a different conversation. That becomes then like, look, dude, listen, we gave you some room here, right? We gave you a shot here to manage this on your own. You didn't really show up though. So we're gonna have to really look at this plan again and see if there's something different we need to do in order to make sure. Maybe it's checking in twice a week, right?
Yeah, I tell my clients that all the time. The best way to get mom and dad off your back is to not need them on your back, and you're in charge of that. You have control over that. And I think that is like you mentioned, like the power struggle. I think highlighting where the kid's power is can be really helpful, right? It's like you do have some control over how helicoptery your parents are. Obviously, you can't control their behavior, but you can control the need for that behavior to an extent, right? And sometimes, it takes a couple like rounds of that. Those weekly check-ins are super valuable, and sometimes it takes a couple weeks for that to fully kind of settle in. But
Sure.
yeah, it can be super helpful.
I will say though, in my experience, it's usually the parents that fold first.
Yeah.
And they're not able to not ask about school during
Yeah.
the week, or not able to not check the grades.
And I
during
get
the
that, right?
week.
Because you care. I mean, you're a parent, right? It's like seeing your child struggling and not being able to help, I can imagine must be
Yeah.
an extremely hard thing for parents to do. That's your baby. You don't want them in pain. You want them to succeed. And to let them fail and to let them struggle must be like nails on a chalkboard,
Sure.
like that's got to be really hard. I always like talk with parents about that. Like you will struggle with that. Like that's normal because you care about your kid. But, kind of what we were talking about, that immediate gratification, right? Like it's like, you have to look at the long term, look at the big picture. It's hard.
Yeah, because it's like, I feel better because I checked.
Right.
I feel better because I asked. So really what's happening is the parent is meeting their need in the
Right.
moment, right? And I'm moving towards what feels most comfortable for me in this moment versus what is probably going to be best big picture long term
Yeah.
for my child. And it's not easy,
Yeah.
right? But nothing that matters is. Like the stuff
Yeah.
that actually ends up being the most effective and the best for most people is usually on the back end of something very difficult, right? Like if we're just comfortable all the time, we're stagnant, we're not growing, and it's the same for parents. And it's harder now for parents than it's ever been because they're competing with so much more stimulation and other information that's coming in that they didn't have when they were growing up.
Yeah.
And it's really difficult. And then they're also being scrutinized, right? Like everyone's like parents could be really judgy of other parents and how they choose to parent their kids. And, it's crazy. The social media, Hillsborough mom to mom, Bridgewater mom to mom, like some of these parents, some of the guys are crazy out there. It's insane. Like no wonder your kids are cyberbullying people. Like
You're doing it too. Yeah.
It's bad, man. Sometimes, right? There's some really great stuff out there too, and like if you've never had therapy in your life, then, you end up being an adult who never had therapy, and, it could be kind of weird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, like you said, that's where the parent coaching comes in handy. I find myself recommending parent coaching a lot for the kids with like the formal diagnosis of ADHD, because just having that education and having a space for the parents so that they can validate their experience with it. Like, obviously our work is with the kids and the clients, and there are clients, not, not the parents, but the parents' feelings and reactions and their own stuff is, of course, going to influence, the way that they relate to their kid, the way that they parent. Yeah, I think what you were
It's
saying earlier about,
normal for a parent and child's emotions to be tangled in with
Yeah.
each other. And that's where like being able to take a step back to untangle it,
Yeah.
it helps you see clearer of like how I need to approach this situation.
Yeah. Do you guys see too, like sometimes teachers will upload the grades online, but a common like fight that I hear with like my clients and their parents is like, well, they didn't add this grade yet, so that's not an accurate representation of how I'm doing, which I think is sometimes true, like
It is.
this grade hasn't been entered yet. Oh, I just did bad on that one quiz, but it's the only grade. It's early in the school year. It's the only grade in the book yet, and there's it's not accurate. It's not accurate how I'm doing, and like I think because a lot of parents didn't grow up with a system like that, they're like hesitant like to trust their kids on that, which I understand because there's kids that will kind of use that and lie about it, and um, but that's like another really common thing I'm seeing with the grades being uploaded in real time. It's like not actually representative of how they're doing.
Yeah, they have like one homework assignment in and it says it's a 50.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, or like the teacher slacks off and isn't putting grades in.
Right.
Like, dude, and I hear about that a lot, honestly.
Mhm.
Like, there's a lot of awesome teachers out there, but there's some ones that aren't that great either. Like, as well, like where I've had clients who in high school and in college that it's like coming up to the midterm and the first exam grade isn't in yet and they're going into it not even knowing how they're doing, right? Like what do I have to get on this exam in order to do well in this class? And like so that is true, right? And I think that the approach I would take is to tell the parent like, all right, look, dude, like, hey, Billy, I'm going to trust you. All right. I'll take your word for it. Right. And at the same time, if it turns out that you're lying to me, then I'm just never going to trust you about this again. Like, you know what I'm saying? So it's up to you what you want to do here. Like, you could be straight with me and let me know, like, you just missed the assignment. Or tell me that, yeah, this is what's actually happening. But, like, I'm going to give you this opportunity to maintain trust with me. But if they turn out to be lying, then, hey, the consequence to that is that I'm not going to believe you the next time this kind of comes up. It's going to get harder to believe you the next time that comes up. And just to reiterate what you're saying, though, Carly, like, and I have this conversation with parents a lot that, like, I feel very confident that the advice that we're giving is right. I really do. But I'm also doing it from sitting in this nice, comfortable chair in a relaxed atmosphere, being like, "This is what you got to do," like you got to do this. Like, I just want to acknowledge that it's not easy, right? Like, it really isn't, And like, people like all the time, like before I had Olive, they were like, "Oh, you just wait. You don't have kids. You'll see." You'll see. And I feel like secretly my clients were like wishing for me to have some demon child just to get payback. See, this is what we were talking about. Like, but like I even notice it like with Olive, like, if you just turn the TV on, and we have this big ass TV, right? And if you put the TV on, everything else, and she's only 4.5 months, she's like locked onto it. And I get that she's just seeing lights and shapes and everything. It's not necessarily the content that she's absorbing, but she locks into it. And if you turn her around on the couch, she's looking back over her shoulder. So we really try not to like let her in front of the screen, because I know about this stuff, and I'm like, okay, I don't want to start her too young of looking to this thing for stimulation and for comfort, right? And like a little bit, like I like to take her and put her on the couch with me, and I put Seinfeld on, and we watch a little Seinfeld together, from time to time. But like, dude, listen, when she starts crying and I'm home alone and Michelle's not around and I gave her food, I changed her diaper and everything, and I know that I could just flip on that TV and my life gets easier in that moment. It's difficult not to do.
Yeah, of course.
It's difficult not to do. And I think that a lot of people today, like, it's not just the teenagers and the kids that are like impacted by how the world works now, plenty of adults are being conditioned to move towards what feels good in the moment. Plenty
Yeah.
of adults are addicted to their phones. Plenty of
Absolutely.
adults are scrolling through social media and playing video games and absorbing a lot of media. So I think that it's easier then for that parent to hand the iPad over. Like I think I might have mentioned this before, and I apologize if I did, but I remember being out to breakfast with Michelle, and this young couple came in, and they had like a newborn, right? Like she probably about the same age as Olive. She was like 4 months or something like that. And they sit down at breakfast, and they put the car seat up on the table, and dad's eating his breakfast across from his wife, and he's got his iPhone out, and he's put the phone in the baby's face, and it's like this trippy app that's spinning, and he's just got it held there in the baby's face as they're having breakfast. And I'm like, man, like I could understand it. I understand they just want to maybe have a nice
A
breakfast
break,
and
yeah.
they haven't had it. And you're doing what feels good in the moment. Are you setting yourself up to have more struggles with your kid in the future because you're getting them dependent on
Yeah.
this device for soothing, so early on,
Definitely. I even noticed, like, with the transition back to school, for all of summer, these kids were on their iPads, glued to them when they weren't at camp, which some of them didn't go to camp. I very much encourage that they go to camp because they're not allowed to usually have phones there, and they're actually doing things that, like, they need to do, running around, being in nature. But a lot of them are at home on their computers, on their tablets, watching videos. And then the parents will come in a week after they start in school. These kids are not focusing. And it's like, well, yeah, no shit, they're not focusing. They were looking and getting all these hits of dopamine from their iPad for 2 months straight. And now they have to pay attention to the teacher for 6 hours.
Yeah, that was COVID. That was COVID as well. It was the same thing. We turned to these devices for comfort and for connection to people when we were isolated, right? And coming out of COVID, it was hard to kind of fall back into a routine, like this stuff. It's like I know, like I talk about this dopamine thing a lot, but like it's powerful, man.
Yeah.
Like it's like, and it's becoming a real hot button issue. I get hit with all these ads about dopamine detoxes now and things like that, but it's showing up in school. I think you're 100% right. Like all summer long, like especially my kids that are like vaping and then playing video games and on social media all summer and not working and like isolated and smoking weed, and then like school starts, their brain at that point has been really programmed to move towards what feels good in the moment, and that's why they're getting busted vaping in the bathroom and smoking weed at school and like being on their phones. Like it's pretty crazy. Can we touch on a little bit about college kids? Because I had a bunch going off to college for the first time.
Yeah. I had a lot this year too that were going into freshman year. A conversation that came up a lot with those clients is kind of on the topic that we were just talking about, the transition between not just summer and school mode, but high school to college. A lot of similarities, but more differences, I would say. And the biggest like anxiety that I hear about from my incoming college freshman clients is socially. I don't know anybody there. How am I going to make friends? What if I don't like my roommate? What if there's this and this issue, drama? It's a whole new world, especially if they're far away from parents. And I always try to validate like that need for belongingness and connection is healthy and human. And I try to kind of reassure like everyone else in your freshman year is also kind of feeling that, or like most people are, and is also kind of looking for people to cling on to and finding their group and finding their people. So you're not alone in that experience, and sometimes recognizing that really helps. But it's a lot of change. It's a lot of change all at once. You're in a new bedroom, new home base, new people around you, new teachers, new classes, new environment, new phase of life, and that adjustment obviously can be really positive and also really difficult at the same time. And so I just really try to normalize that. Like, don't take your, first couple weeks at college as representative of how the whole experience is going to go, because everyone is like a baby deer trying to walk for the first time.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like everyone is trying to figure it out, and um, it's really daunting for a lot of people. It creates a lot of anxiety for sure.
I had a client that also recently went off to college. And her big thing that she struggled with a lot was the anxiety of like, is she going to be able to maintain a structure at college? Because she knew of all of these other people that went off to college a year before her that ended up not being able to maintain structure, and they ended up failing out of this class or not being able to pass this. And so definitely a perfectionist.
Yeah.
And so she looked at it and like was very much ruminating on like, oh my God, well, like I need to make sure I have a structure, and I need to make sure I get to go to the gym every day, and I need to make sure that like, what am I going to eat? Now I'm like eating at a dining hall, and well, am I going to gain the freshman 15? And it was just like a spiraling a lot. There's a lot of what ifs when you go to college. In a way, there's a beauty to that.
Oh, 100%. And but then like thinking about everything we've just been talking about though, right? So if you had a parent that was monitoring and stepping in for everything else in your life, right? And then you'd get dropped off to be completely independent, like there's a culture shock there, you know. But, you know, along the same lines of what you were saying, Carly, like, you know, what I say to my clients is like, you know, if you're a senior in high school and you're sitting in the lunchroom and you start looking around at all the other students that are there, you see the person for who they are in that moment in time. But for a lot of those people, you also see who they were first grade, second grade. Like a lot of these people have been with you the entire ride, and you have these different memories of the time they threw up on themselves in third grade, and then when they had this tantrum, and then when they got bullied in eighth grade and went through that goth phase, and like, you know, like, so the person in front of you is this collection of memories that kind of identifies that person to you, right? And that's who you are to everybody else. When you go off to college though, you're only being judged by who you are in that moment in time. Everyone gets a fresh start. And that's what I really try to push across to my clients. It's like, dude, like you said, everyone else is in the same boat. Everyone else is going there, nervous about making friends, hoping to make friends, right? And so what usually happens is that beginning of freshman year, there's these like large friend groups, because everyone's just going to grab whoever they can get, you know? But then as the school year starts to progress, October, November, December, little groups start splintering out from that large friend group as people start to kind of show their true colors, and you get to know who people really are. That's what I normally see happening, you know? I also think though, like getting involved in clubs, or if you play a sport, it seems to be helpful. Granted, your college experience is much different, you know, because if you're an athlete, but you're normally going there and you have your team that you meet with, and you have like a home base of people. If you get involved in Greek life and you have a frat or a sorority, you have like your home base, or, you know, like some people never get involved in any of those types of things. They're just kind of, you know, they make their friends and they make their way. But man, I loved college. That's the other thing too. Like I you know, like I know remember when is not supposed to be like the greatest form of conversation, but like I get nostalgic this time of year of college. College, that was awesome. Having all that independence for the first time and meeting new people, and you know, it was a good time in college. I learned a little bit too.
Yeah, sometimes. Do you get the question a lot, like from parents about like readiness for college,
my
and like
God.
what exactly does that mean and look like, and how can you be fully 100% ready? Like that's a conversation that comes up with a lot of my like seniors about to graduate, you know. It's like, how do I know? Are they ready? Should they do community college? Should they do this or that? And that's like a really hard thing to define, readiness, you know?
I'm having a reaction.
Yeah, I see that.
Because I had a frustrating encounter with a parent once about that topic. Because they're asking me, well, actually they weren't asking me about readiness. They were telling me, and then had some co-signers on the team that was also advocating for this person to not go to college.
Yeah.
But what I was trying to communicate to them that there wasn't any mental health concerns, right? Like it was all the stuff she was bringing up was kind of behavioral, getting in some trouble, not listening to the rules, stuff like that. So like my conversation with them was a little bit different in that like, look, I'm not concerned for your child's safety going off to college, but if you're thinking about like, hey dude, I don't want to waste this money because
Yeah.
I don't feel like they're going to be able to like hang in, I'm going to lose all this money because they're going to drop
Yeah.
out of classes or something. That's your decision to make.
Yeah.
As a clinician, it's not up for me to determine what the rules are going to be for your house. All I can speak to is like safety.
Yeah.
Right? Like that I'm not concerned for her safety or his safety going off to college.
Yeah.
And it's something like, yeah, dude, there's no way to tell, man. Like you're just,
Yeah.
you know, like people that like, you know, who are really academically motivated and performing well could go to college and catch a heroin addiction or something.
Or
Like,
vice versa. They could be
yeah.
really struggling in high school and like
then
blossom
Flourished,
at college. Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
That's a little bit of like, that's parents checking a little bit of their own stuff
Yeah.
sometimes, you know,
Yeah.
like I have to deal with this anxiety of not knowing how well my kid's gonna do and what's
Yeah.
going on out there, you know. But I've had parents, man, that like continue on with the same shit, dude. Like
Oh,
I've
yeah.
had parents writing their kids' papers for them in
Yeah.
college and emailing them over, you know, like
Yeah.
it's like it never ends. And it's like, don't you see what the outcome of this is going to be? Okay,
Right.
you got them through high school and into college. Now you're dragging them through college, and then wait, are you gonna go show up at work for them, like
Yeah.
you know, on Monday morning and do the job for them? No.
Right.
And they do. A lot of these kids who had that type of parenting, unfortunately, end up stagnant in their mid-20s and stuck,
Yeah.
and like no direction because life is comfortable enough.
They haven't had to think about it or work on it. Yeah.
Man, no. And then the parents are frustrated with them, like,
Right.
he's not moving.
I've done everything.
I've done everything I could
I've given
for
them
this
all the
kid.
tools, but it's not
Exactly.
really
No.
giving them the tools. Yeah.
No. And
Yeah.
like, so, yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, we talk about like letting your kids fail. Going to college, that's an expensive mistake, you know, if
Sure.
it is a mistake. So I totally get the hesitancy and the wanting to really be sure that this is the right path. Like that is a smart thing to think about. That is a normal thing to think about. But if it's coming from a place of I want to protect them from everything that college could bring,
yeah.
we can't. And of course, like we were saying, having like being a parent, I'm sure not being able to protect your kids from all these things is like the worst. You know, that must be so uncomfortable. But like you said, what the alternative is, okay, I'm gonna continue to try and protect them from these things, and then what?
Then what?
Then they're not
When does it
equipped.
end?
Yeah.
When are they old enough? When are they old
Yeah.
enough to be independent? Like, when
Yeah.
is it going to be okay?
Yeah.
You know? And yeah, it could be really, really difficult for some parents to do that.
Yeah.
Others are like, yeah, get out of here, go. Thank God.
Yep.
You know, like
Yep.
I hear a lot of parents actually feeling sad, you know, about their kid going off to
course.
college, you know,
Yeah.
like, you know, the house feeling empty
Of
and,
course.
you know, missing that energy for those who had like that good relationship, you
Mm-hmm.
know, but will tell you that I see that most of the clients I work with, their relationship with their parents improve after they go
Yeah.
off to college. And like, I'm always pushing for kids to go away to school. I did 1 year at community college before transferring over to Rutgers, not because of my grades or anything like that. Honestly, looking back at it, I had a girlfriend that was a year behind me,
Ooh.
and I might have stuck around back then in order to like stick around with my girlfriend.
Classic.
But like, you know, but then I transferred everything over. But I always talk about like how important those years are. Like, even if you're not like going off to college, but to eventually live independently.
Yeah.
And have that experience and be out there and working and traveling and like having like being responsible for yourself is super, super important.
Yeah. I mean, I think that is like so ingrained in our culture. Like college is the goal, you know, for every high school student. And that might not always be the case. Like some
Sure,
kids are just like not students, you know, that's not like their path in life. And that is sometimes looked down upon, you know, or looked at as like, oh, they couldn't do college, they're doing this instead. But I do think like we are shifting more as a culture to like understanding the value of like trade schools or just like a small business, you know what I mean? Like just other career paths that maybe don't require a college degree. I think like student loans is a big factor in that. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna go put myself like up to my neck in student loan debt for what? Like, do I actually want that? You know, so I think people are more likely to consider other options besides college. I think a lot of parents, I mean, we come from that generation that's like, you have to go to college to get a job. You have to go to college. You have to have a degree to be successful. And I do think that's true to an extent, right? But I don't know. I think hopefully we're shifting more towards like there's other avenues for people to take.
For me, my mom went to college and got her master's, but then my dad didn't go to college, and he came from a family of people that did not go to college.
Yeah.
So I was technically like a first generation college student of that my dad's side of the family.
Yeah.
So it was like it was weird though because my mom's own anxiety got in the way of that of like, no, you have to go to college.
Yeah.
I came to that on my own, but I know like for my sister, she didn't. It wasn't. And like for my mom, it was a lot of having to check in with herself.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean my daughter's a failure because she didn't go to college.
Right.
There's other things that kids can do. School's not for everyone.
Yeah.
Dude, especially now, right? Like, you get kids that are going to college for like a degree in like, I don't know, like art as a social construct of, you know, like, and it's like, okay, what are you going to do with that? Sounds really cool to study, you know?
Yeah.
And at the same time, at the end of the day, what the fuck are you going to do with that? Like, and it's so, like, I'm all for someone going to work in a trade, you know? And I think that makes a lot of sense to me, dude. Like, the idea of like, you know, I love being an entrepreneur. I love owning my own business. And so the idea of like, yeah, dude, go into trade school, become an electrician, work as a union guy for a little bit, get the experience, then start your own electrician business and like build that up into something.
Totally.
I got friends that make a lot more money than I do.
Oh yeah.
Working in trades, dude, you know?
Yeah.
I think for that parent, my conversation with the parent about that though, if the parent is pushing super, super hard, listen, man, like if you force them to do college now just for the sake of doing college, they're gonna like they're gonna study something they don't care about. They're
Right.
not gonna be invested, right? They could go to college anytime they want.
Always
man.
gonna be there.
You know, it's always going to be there. And I don't think a lot of 18-year-olds are equipped to make a decision at that point in their life of what they want to do for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
And I know I told the story on day one, dude. My client had no plans of going to college. None. Okay? His name's also Billy. And he had no plans of going to college.
All our clients are
And I
named
think I
Billy.
called him Billy the first time too. No plans at all. His dad was in the carpenters union, grandfather was in the carpenters union. John, I want to go into the carpenters union. Barely graduated high school, goes to the carpenters union, reads Harry Potter. That triggers something in his brain to start studying. Goes to RVCC, gets into the honors economics program, gets accepted into a Princeton summer course in economics. And I get a text from him the other day that I think he's like 22, 23 years old, just got a full acceptance to both Princeton and Yale University.
Wow.
The dude who had no plans of
plans,
going
yeah.
to college, but if his mother would have forced him to do it at 18, I bet you he wouldn't be in the position he's
Right.
in now because he made his own decisions. He had the autonomy to be able to like explore these things on his own.
Yeah.
And then on his own figured out where he wanted to go. So like I think it's the same thing of like, you know, like not getting into that power struggle with your kid and being able to kind of watch from afar and be supportive and be there if they need you, but like let them start to make a bit of their own decisions and let them kind of like things naturally. And I'm biased, you know, like my 20s were crazy. I went to college, but I barely went to class. I partied all the time while I was there. I got my degree in American Studies. It didn't mean shit. You know, I didn't get a job. Like I sold Craftmatic adjustable beds after college.
That's very important work, Jeff.
It is important work, but I didn't have like my degree in American Studies
Yeah.
didn't get me the job selling Craftmatic beds.
Right.
At 30 years old, you know, and I'm 45 now, that's when I decided to go back to grad school and to do this. I think a lot of kids and their parents are like forced to believe that they like have to fit inside of this box, that you have to do high school and then right to college, and after college you start your career and
Yeah.
and it doesn't necessarily go that way. Because I have a lot of people that like I know that who did it like right the first time, they did all that, and they end up in a career that they hate.
Yeah.
And they're miserable and they feel like
Yeah.
they can't turn it around now. Or they end up in a relationship. They get married right after college to their college
Right.
sweetheart, and now they're getting divorced, or they're on
Right.
their third marriage. Like,
Right.
I think have taken some time, and like the last thing I'll say about this is like, because I think that so many kids now in relation to school and what they're going to study, they're trying to figure that out by looking online. And I agree with, I think it's Simon Sinek that they're saying that like innovation and those kinds of like figuring those types of things out come from being out in the world and experiencing things and having different encounters with different people and being able to be like, oh, you know what, that's really cool. I like that. And like, wait, maybe if we did this way as opposed to that way. And like, that's where you figure out who you are and what you want to do. You're not going to figure that out from a Google search.
Yeah.
I recently had a parent email me saying that she was.
And clip it. Sorry.
I recently had a parent email me about how her daughter's a sophomore in high school, literally just entered last week, and was like, "Can you help my daughter figure out what she's going to major in college?" I was like, "Oh, interesting." So then I brought that up to her. I was like, "Hey, like, what's going on? Like, is there this pressure at home?" And she was like, "Yeah, I don't even know if I want to go to college, but mom really wants me to do X, Y, and Z." And we like had a couple of conversations about like potential of what she would want to do, maybe not want to do. And I also set that like limit even with her of like you're 15
Yeah.
and like you don't need to know what you're going to do 3 years from now right now. Like, it is totally normal for you not to know that. And I was someone that switched my major in college multiple times because, and it's okay for you to do that. Like, you don't need to know exactly what you're going to do when you're 18. Your brain isn't fully even developed yet.
Or even if you do know exactly what you want to do, we are constantly evolving and changing as people, hopefully. So with that, with the natural changes in growth that you're going to go through becoming an adult, maybe your preferences change. Maybe you learn more about yourself. Like, we just did an episode on how we became therapists, right? And I think a lot of us took really windy paths there, you know, and it's pretty common and normal. And yeah, to your point, like, you could, what were you saying earlier? I had like a thought about what you were saying. What were you saying earlier about like just the readiness for college and parents wanting to kind of control that process? Like,
I'm not sure.
I had something good. You said something good that I wanted to come on, and I can't remember now. Cut that out. Cut it out.
What were we talking about? We were talking about, so parents trying to control it, and it being behavioral versus like a mental health concern.
Oh, yeah, I remember. So you were kind of talking about like parents who drag their kids through college as well as high school, right? They're trying to protect them from things and control things, even through their college experience. But eventually, even if you do that, your kid is going to reach a point where they have to make their own decisions anyway. You know, like whether that's in college or after college, because you could be coddled all throughout your education, but eventually you're going to reach that point in your life, whether it's right after college or years down the road, where you're like, is this what I actually want? Am I feeling happy? Am I feeling fulfilled? So you could do all the protecting and controlling and planning and coddling, but it doesn't really protect your kid from that experience, right? It's good to have that experience. It's good to reach that point in your life where you're really trying to reflect and like critically think about, what do I actually want for my life? And that's not something that you need protection from. You know, that's something you're supposed to think about, and that's how you grow as a person.
I hear a lot of kids, like college age, like, or older teenagers. The word a lot is purpose. I want to have some purpose. I want purpose. And I was thinking about that, right? Because I think we're blessed that we have careers that you could say have purpose, right? There's purpose involved in this, and that reward, the fact that like we're hopefully impacting someone's life in a positive way and playing, like we said last time, this small role even of who they end up being, you know, like, okay, we're lucky to have a career like that. But I also said that like your career also doesn't necessarily have to be the thing that brings you purpose.
Right.
Like, you know, like you could like work in order to live, not live to work. Is that the
Yeah.
way it goes? I think,
Yeah.
like, because
I'm
it's
like,
like, if your job doesn't have purpose, like maybe like, dude, maybe you're a garbage man, right? And you can find purpose in that too, right? You are
yeah,
contributing to society,
you
living
are.
cleaner and everything. But let's say you don't find purpose in that job and you don't even really like it that much, but you make enough money and you have enough time off that outside of those hours that you work, you find purpose
Yeah.
elsewhere in your life. Like it could be that too.
Yeah.
I think finding a career that brings you purpose is awesome and not
It's optional.
always realistic.
Yeah.
Like sometimes it's just a job you have to do,
Yeah.
and that's what it is. And I think there is this whole I need purpose in my life. Like, no, dude, sometimes you just have to fucking work.
Yeah.
Like it's a job. Like
As
Yeah.
Kim Kardashian says,
Get your ass up and work.
Kardashian.
Yeah.
I guess she works hard, kind of, right?
I think
Like,
she
I don't
does.
know.
in her own way.
Like a
Like
voyeur or something.
it's probably not super easy to be Kim Kardashian.
You guys know Rick Rubin?
Oh yeah, hell yeah.
His ideology on the whole topic is like my favorite because he always states that the big thing that people, especially in his industry with music, where it's like a very much passion driven sort of thing, that everyone is looking to work in the same field that their passion is in so that they live a full, happy life and they're only doing what they want to do. And he says, like, I don't think that's how life is. I think sometimes and most often, the job is the means to support what you want to do with your life.
Sure.
And the job is the necessary evil that you kind of have to have in your life, where it's like, yes, I need this because we built up this structure of commerce and everything else where you need this structure, but that's not my life. My life is I love to read, I love bird watching, I love whatever.
Yeah, dude. And I love Rick Rubin, man. Like, and I 100% agree with that.
Yeah.
Like, that I think that, as we evolved as people, our jobs originally were survival, right? Like we had to do these things in order to like, and actually there's Ben Franklin talks about this actually. So Ben Franklin's my favorite guy from history in general. I've read his autobiography like 5 times over. Like he was such a cool motherfucker. Like he really was. But he was talking about like how back then people used to refer to Native Americans as the savages, and he'd be like, yeah, they're talking about how all they do is sit around and smoke peace pipes and tell stories and sing songs. And what Ben Franklin said was like, well, no, that's because they only do what they have to do, right? And once they're done doing those things that they have to do, they're able to then tend to their life and they have this free time. And there was a time that like that's what our job was just to survive. But as life became easier and easier and we found ourselves wanting more and more things, that's when people started working more and more in order to not just survive, but to have the car they want, the house they want, to buy the clothes that they like and everything. And so I do think that, fast forward to today, like being able to just grab, to have a job that you don't hate. And whether you hate it or not is really going to come down to how you choose to think about that job you have, whatever it is, really, right? And then to be able to like maybe just find that sense of fulfillment and purpose elsewhere in your life outside of those hours that you're working, and or if you're lucky enough, you end up being a therapist like us, and you get both at the same time, which really is kind of special.
It is. Sure. It is. I have a lot of creatives, like a handful of clients who are really into some kind of art or creative outlet. And a lot of them will say like, I want to keep that in my bubble. I don't want to make that my job because I don't want to stress about it. This is my fun thing. This is my relaxing thing. I don't want to make that my source of income. I don't want to put that weight on that hobby because I want to keep it a hobby, because it's where I find my fulfillment.
What's that art school in Georgia? SCAD, right? Super expensive school, right? And I've had a couple of clients that went to SCAD, and a bunch of different artists that I've worked with, that when they go to college, what they'll tell me is that the hardest classes that they take are their art classes.
Yeah.
Because like, the math and the science, like if you fail that, then like, okay, cool, you're not good at math and science and you don't remember that shit, right? But to get a bad grade on a piece of art that they made
You like
is very
poured your heart
personal,
into.
right?
Yeah, it's
It's very
personal.
personal for them, and so they struggle then sometimes to do those assignments
Yeah.
because of how invested they are in that art, you know. And
Yeah.
listen, working in that field of making a living from art is not an easy thing to do. You know, it's really not. And I think, you know, plenty of people can do it. And at the same time, I think a lot of people end up kind of disappointed sometimes when, you know, when they see how difficult it is to actually break into that industry and make money through their art in the way that they want to.
Right.
You know, like I had a client once that went to SCAD and wound up taking a job operating a printing press. Didn't need to go to SCAD to operate that printing press.
Yeah.
I could have trained you in that like a week, you
Yeah.
know. But that was, you know, a huge disappointment for that person. You know, but anyway, I think we're wrapping up around there. Yeah. Do you guys have any last thoughts on going back to school? Ben, John, any thoughts on anything that we need to cover?
I think it's very full circle.
Yeah, we're okay. We kind of brought her back around. So thank you again for joining us. I think this is going to be our like regular crew.
It seems like it, yeah.
Like we're definitely going to have the three of us each episode, and then maybe bring other team members on when we feel like it. And when they feel like it. But I want to thank you guys for joining. Please follow us on Instagram, Facebook, subscribe to our channel on YouTube. That really helps us out. I'd love to have more of you guys checking out our videos. So thanks again, and we'll see you next time.